Hello, my name is Taylor Drake, and today we're going to be talking about the women's suffrage movement. To begin, what started the movement? Women were tired of having to rely on men. Women were tired of not having the same rights as men. Women wanted to be able to work and have jobs outside of the home. Women also wanted to have a say in politics and other affairs that at the time only men were allowed to have a say in. What year did the suffrage movement begin, and where did this all take place? Well, first, the Women's Suffrage Convention took place in 1848. This was located in Seneca Falls, New York. Here, they began coming up with a plan on how to change women's rights. In 1850, the first National Women's Rights Convention was held in Worcester, Massachusetts. From this point on, a women's national convention was held every year until 1860, with the exception of 1854. Now let's go over a few of the influential women of the women's suffrage movement. First, we have Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony is a very famous women's activist. She was raised in a home where her family always believed men and women should be treated as equals. From a very young age, she was an activist and someone who always stood up for the rights she deserved. She was an advocate for married women having property rights and the anti-slavery movement, and eventually joined the women's suffrage movement. She believed that men and women of all races should have the same rights. She spoke at several political events and shared this message until her death in 1906. Next, we look at Alice Paul. Alice Paul was a very well-educated woman. She had her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and she was always a very determined woman. In 1910, Alice Paul joined the National American Women Suffrage Association, or NAWSA, and fought very aggressively for the suffrage movement to be passed. In 1914, Alice Paul left the NAWSA due to the women of that organization becoming agitated at her for her constant loud and public movements. Alice, when she left, then formed her own organization known as the National Women's Party. Paul went on to present many movements and amendments until her death in 1977. Next, we have Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Stanton was married to an abolitionist. One time in particular, she was told that she was not allowed into the anti-slavery convention because she was female. This made Elizabeth Stanton want to stand up for women's rights, and she, along with Lucretia Mott, organized the first women's right convention in New York, which was previously mentioned. She fought for the ratification of the 14th Amendment and for change in the Constitution concerning equality between men and women. Elizabeth Stanton played a very important role in the women's suffrage movement and did not stop fighting for equality until her death in 1902. Lastly, we have Lucy Stone. Like some of the other activists mentioned, she began as an activist for the anti-slavery movement. She is also famously known for being one of the first women who refused to change her last name when she got married. She felt it showed that men and women were unequal. Many years later, she helped form the Women's Suffrage Association and began publishing the Women's Journal, which is a very feminist article written by her. Lucy Stone died in 1893, but her article lived on until 1931. A quick and brief summary or timeline of the women's suffrage movement. The first women's convention, as we previously mentioned, was in 1848. Then we had the ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868. Next, we had the ratification of the 15th Amendment. This happened in 1870. Next, we have the states starting to allow women to vote in 1893. This happened one state at a time, and unfortunately, not all the states allowed women to vote at the same time. Next, we have the 19th Amendment added to the Constitution in 1920. And I want to take a moment and point out the major year gap between the first Women's Convention and the 19th Amendment added to the Constitution. This was in no way a quick or fast thing that happened in American history. And next, we put the Equal Pay Act. I put this here so we can point out that once the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution, women did not stop fighting for their rights. They began to argue for other things and fight for other rights that they still did not quite have, the Equal Pay Act being one of those. This happened in 1963. In conclusion, we have briefly looked at the amazing history of women's rights and equality. We have looked at the beginning of the women's suffrage movement, the influential women who helped change the course of history, and the benefits of the hard work and dedication thousands of men and women put into equality for men and women. Thanks to these brave and bold women, today we have the right to vote, earn as much as a male, work in the same positions, go to the same school, and have access to the same level of education. Thank you for listening.